should be able to come on now.
It's spinning like my head.
Are you joining us by Zoom, Dan? It's hard to. You're not on. We don't see your face or your voice. It's hard to hear your voice. Oh, there he is.
We go.
There he is.
Get it. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sally.
So we are live at this point, peoples, and we need to wait for at least one other person to start.
Yeah.
Ed, are you back from upstate?
For the moment. We're heading back up tomorrow.
Ah, good.
We're upstate.
Thank you for taking time to come and joining us.
Mayfield, it's a town at the foot of the Adirondacks. It's straight north of Amsterdam, which is west of Albany, about an hour maybe west of Albany.
Ah.
Oh, so it is upstate.
It's upstate, yeah. It's
Okay,
not like when I was at Buffalo, they thought upstate was Westchester.
Our chair has arrived, and we 1, 2.
We have a quorum.
We have a quorum. Charles, you're live, and you have a quorum, so you can open the meeting. You're on mute, or we can't hear you.
No.
Take a sledgehammer. It makes one feel good.
Anybody good at charades?
Charles is on. Can we hear him?
We're having trouble hearing him. He has to sit.
His mic and video say they're on, so.
No, the video is on. It's the sound that is the issue at the moment. Charles, if you can't figure it out, you might want to try and sign off and sign back in and see if that works. That's the only thing I can think of. The controls say that you're live, both picture and sound, but we're still having trouble hearing you. We have a phone.
Hello.
Hello, Glenn.
Hello, how are you? Yes.
Good. You have to hold on for a minute. We're having trouble getting Charles so that we can hear him.
While we're waiting, who's going to take the minutes tonight?
I'll do it, Alan.
Okay, thank you, Lynn.
I can hear you now, Charles.
Can't hear you.
Can everybody hear? Can everybody hear Charles through my phone?
No.
No.
Let's see. Okay. Hold on for a minute. Okay, Charles, talk a little bit more. See if we can hear you.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll do it that way. I have my phone next to the computer, so your live audio visually.
Okay, great. Yeah, I don't know why the phone dial-in isn't working, and I don't actually have audio on my computer.
I don't know, but Glenn, are you still here?
Yes.
Okay, so Glenn is dialed in by phone.
Yes, okay.
So anyway, let's just go on. You have a quorum, so you can open the meeting.
Great. Motion to open the, what are we in now, October Budget Advisory Committee meeting 2021.
I make a motion to open the meeting.
I second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. So do we have a motion to approve the minutes from the August meeting?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Second.
What was that date, Charles? August? Does anyone have them in front of them? I'm just, since I'm taking the minutes, I want to make sure it's, sorry to be so ministerial here, but what was the date of that meeting? Does anyone remember? August 4th?
Yes, August 4th, Wednesday, August 4th.
Okay. Thank you.
Can you guys see my shared screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So those were the minutes, and I will pull up this. Can you see the latest capital budget framework?
Yes.
Great. So has everybody had a chance to review the changes to the capital budget framework, which were an effort to comments?
I took a look at it. I'm fine with what's here.
I have some edit changes and some why we consider more substantive changes to propose.
Do you want to pull them up?
I haven't had a chance to
sharing?
input them into the document.
Okay. Do you want to talk about them or gather it, distribute a suggested revision, and then we can communicate on that leading up to next month, and then hopefully go into next month with whatever we want to integrate, and then we can make a motion next month to finalize it and get it back out?
I'd be willing to do that if that's what the committee would like.
I was going to suggest that we discuss your substantial,
Yes.
your
Absolutely.
substantial changes, so we're not going back and forth with emails.
Yeah, your substantive changes, yes.
Okay. First of all, on capital planning principles, I would begin.
Just briefly, do we have somebody who can take the minutes tonight?
Let us take minutes.
Yep, I'm taking minutes, Charles.
Okay, great. And Bill had contacted me that he may be late, so he may be joining us, but just FYI. Sorry, Ed, go ahead.
So under capital planning principles, I would have the first sentence say that the Budget Committee recommends the adoption of the following capital planning principles, colon, and then go through them. And then on the second bullet, on the fifth line, again, we talk about this, and I think it was one of the things that the trustees were a little bit aggravated about. We talk about any increase in debt service is going to cause a reduction in operating expenses. That's only one of the two choices that we have. We can also raise non-property tax or other revenue. So we don't have to just make it sound like we're going to cut people, since that's the main part of our operating expense.
Right, and we actually say that later on somewhere in this document, that it's an either or.
Well, we said it in your document.
No, but I had the initial reaction to that line as well, but then I read further on about increasing revenue. So that's why I didn't say anything. But I think it's valid.
Although I would say, I guess the question here is, if the village does not properly budget for debt service, and during the course of the year, although they tend to finance, I'm just thinking out loud here. What I'm trying to think of is, would this situation arise during the course of the year when you couldn't raise fees quickly or easily, as opposed to cutting expenses?
Right, but other revenue may come in over plan. We might get more in sales tax or the mortgage tax.
Okay, then I'll say, I think it's a fair comment then.
Yeah, I just think it's wrong to just emphasize that, that any increase in debt is going to cause a reduction of expenses.
Okay.
We have other choices.
Sorry, I'm fine.
Yep.
Fine.
Okay, so now on the, it's not really substantive, but it's a point that I'd like to make. On the fourth bullet, we speak about, while limited, projects fully funded by state or federal aid. This seemed to be something that the staff misread. They made it sound like we were going to be looking at projects that have already been capitalized, and if they don't meet these criteria, we're not going to keep them in the capital plan. And so my notes would say, we're not looking back. So I would change the language to be projects which will be fully funded. So we're talking about future projects, we're not looking back.
Is it, so if a project is fully funded by sources other than the village funds, is it mandatory that they meet the evaluation criteria?
Not if they're already projects that have already been in the capital plan. If the board has already approved the projects and they've already issued bonds for them, then we're not asking.
No, that's not my question.
No, but that's the point is that that's how the staff read. I think their comments seem to be interpreting that section as saying we're going to be reviewing, already approved capital projects.
Right. No, I was questioning your rewording, and I agree with you. So if we reword that, we're now talking future events.
Yeah, so long as they meet the future. Yeah.
Is projects. The evaluation criteria necessary? It's
yes.
Well, why? It's fully funded elsewhere.
Well, it's just because it's fully funded at this point doesn't necessarily mean that we have the staff to do it.
Yeah.
Right, but that's different from the evaluation criteria.
Well, that's one of the evaluation criteria.
No, it's not. In my opinion, they would still be subject to the evaluation criteria. Since funding is not an issue, and it is a trade-off with what they already have on the plate. I think clarifying the language in the bullet is a good idea. So
Yeah, and Ellen, if you think there's a better way of saying it, that I'm okay with it. But yeah, it's still any future project is going to be. Well, I mean, we intended it to be subject to the evaluation criteria. Just because people are going to give us money to do something doesn't mean we should do it. There has to be a good reason to do it, not just that we got the money.
No, I agree with you on that. I'm in a way playing devil's advocate of what pushback we may get.
Okay.
Because we saw last time every word was nitpicked.
Yeah, a lot of words, that's for sure.
Yep.
But it seemed to me that both of us are missing I don't mean all of us, I mean both the staff and we are missing our point, which they focused on that they were interpreting it to be projects, applying to projects that had already been funded.
Well, I think that's probably because of the way, if I understood what Dan Sarnoff was saying correctly, grants are applied for after the fact. Or they don't receive the funds until the project is completed.
Yeah, but I think
so we're laying out the money during the project if we have to do any progress payments, and then we get the money back if the grant's approved.
Yes, that's for some of them, that's true.
Right. So that's probably why they took it that way. I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, I could understand when I read the language after reading their comment. That's what it just reads like it's already funded projects, like it's already approved project in the plan, and we're now going to subject those to evaluation criteria. No, we only talking about future projects.
that's right.
Yep.
That's right.
Okay, so that's now there's something, you know, there's something about the debt service as a percentage of the operating budget, and their comment was something else, like the fund balance. I'm not sure I understand, or the reserves. What is the rule? You know, we use the word operating budget, but the staffs seem to say we should be using something else.
I had changed that elsewhere for their suggestion. It was, I guess, the general budget was the suggestion. Which I incorporated. I feel like that could actually be a little confusing, but in an effort to accommodate, but then we're going to probably want to be consistent, to your point, Ed.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the difference is. You know, that difference in the, you know, the language here. Yeah, I think we should. I didn't catch that if we weren't using the same term, but they use a different term. And then another point that they make is that we are limiting it to financing the non-funded part out of a capital plan, when they suggest it could be issuance of debt or fund balance.
Correct.
And we don't say that. Right, it would only be in the capital plan if we are going to be funding it out of debt service. You know, issuance of debt. Again, I'm trying to follow up on the points that they made. When I read over the document and then I read over the staffs, I thought these things were not covered in a way that the staff is suggesting they be covered.
Help me understand the point there, Ed. Was it they're saying, the staff is saying that we could use either debt or the fund balance to cover the cost of a project. Is that what they're saying?
Yes.
Yes, that's how I read it. It's their, it's the point about five, the document they have, it's on their page, looks like page 2. And it's the second, the bolded point begins, projects fully funded by state and federal, just like what this one talks about. And it says at the last sentence, the unfunded portion should be funded through the issuance of debt or fund balance. And our point doesn't cover the fund balance possibility.
And I think they raised that at the work session meeting as well, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I don't remember that out. I'm not as attuned to some of this stuff. When I read it, it doesn't go over my head as easily as when I hear it. It's this, your hand is over the paragraph now, Charles. Yes. The bold is taken from our document. The non-bold is theirs.
Right, or fund.
Okay, let me go to the next page.
Are you comfortable trying to incorporate these with like a track change, and then we can?
Yes, there's maybe one or two things.
We can try to do this live if we want, but otherwise recirculate.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with it. I'm sorry?
Can you hear me?
Hello? Who's speaking?
Glenn.
Hi, how? We can't see you, Glenn.
Are you still on?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
Yeah, I have to speak from my phone, not from the computer. I had to mute myself on the computer so you could hear me. I was just mentioning, they don't usually refer to it as fund balance. They simply say either we're going to issue debt or take the money out of the general fund. And,
well,
that's the way.
Isn't fund balance the same thing?
But they never refer to it as a fund balance. All they say is we'll take the money out of the general fund.
Except Glenn, that's their wording.
Can't say they never did it. That's the exact wording that they gave us.
That's the word. Yeah, that's the wording they gave us.
Yeah, but I'm saying anytime they passed anything, they all say is they'll take it out of the general fund.
Okay, so the general fund is the fund balance?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think you could use general fund. Why you have the term general, which is all of the money is just that, is all of the money, be it a reserve or fund balance or surplus sales tax, which is a possibility.
Yeah, any money we bring in.
Read it to differentiate it from the sewer fund, to differentiate it from
yes,
miscellaneous funds, if you will.
Yeah, the sewer fund is a dedicated fund. It's not part of the general fund.
Just like the library.
The water fund is a dedicated fund. Yeah.
They're introducing general budget now as nomenclature, which
anything that isn't otherwise assigned simply goes into the general fund. Whatever revenue we bring in goes into the general fund. Even when we let's say we get a bond, money for a bond, it goes into the general fund, and then a transfer is made to pay the bond.
It seems that we have a choice. Do we want to take the specific language that they used because we have the fund balance, we have the reserve, we have the general fund. We could get into a quagmire by trying to figure out if we use the language that they used, would they be more receptive to that?
Right, you're probably better off just using their language.
You know, I don't know. You know, their problem is that, Glenn, you understood that they don't use fund balance. Maybe this is just Dan Sarnoff's language, and we'll get ourselves in more trouble by just using his language. Dan, do you know what is a better term?
Can you promote Bill Sparrow to participant? Thank you. You'll be joining us in a minute. We're having electrical problems, but we're going to promote you to participant.
And I'm sorry, Ed, you'd cut out while Dan took the other call. But
sure. Dan, we've been talking about this issue of what language to use to talk about either the fund balance, the general fund, and we wanted, I mean, Dan Sarnoff used the word fund balance in the document that he gave us about our document. But Glenn is saying that that's generally not the word the people use. The staff
normally
uses
normally when they do a resolution, the only language in there is either it's going to be through debt service or general fund. Like they just made a couple of budget adjustments to increase the operating budget. And all they said was, we're taking $60,000 out of the general fund, and then we're adding it to an operating line. And that's normally what they do. They never say it's out of, they simply say it's out of the general fund, which would be, you know, the $12, $14 million, whatever they have in the general fund.
Yeah, and they're now suggesting to use the term general budget for operating budget. And if we're looking to differentiate operating budget from capital budget, capital fund and general budget, that's starting to get potentially confusing. And then the fund be part of the general fund.
Yeah, I don't know the answer.
Budget.
Yeah, the reserve fund, general fund, it's all basically the same thing. You know, whatever is in the general fund is your reserve fund, and then you've appropriated a certain amount over the year for operating. But you know, you have revenue that comes in all year, and you have expenses that go out all year. And the general budget is simply the balance at any the balance at any given time of where your budget stands. And then when a bond comes in, the bond is paid, it goes into the general budget, and then Augie will take the money out of the general budget and pay off a bond.
Well, let's not use the word budget. Let's use the word fund. I definitely don't want to use the word general budget.
I meant fund.
No, I know that, but yeah, we're falling into the trap that they do.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I said just the general fund. That's all they're doing. They can reserve it. You can consider it reserve, whatever else. No matter what happens, it's going to come out of the general fund. Either they're going to pay for it outright, or they're going to take out of the general fund, which is what they actually did with they had a $42,000 shed that hadn't been paid for several years, and they just took care of it at the last meeting, and they took $42,000 out of the general fund that paid for the capital project. They had a shed that the Parks Department had purchased 2018 or 2017. It was in the capital budget. They appropriated $42,000 out of the general fund, and they paid the capital project off that way, which was the shed, and that was the last meeting.
Well,
So that's
I'm looking at the fiscal, I'm looking at the fiscal year 2018 audit. And here's just some from the notes section. The general fund is the primary operating fund of the village. Okay. At the end of the current fiscal year, total fund balance of the general fund was 13 million, which I believe is what we call the reserve. Okay. So the term clearly, Dan, Dan is an accounting guy. I mean, he's, I think he's that background, but the term fund balance is used extensively in the audit, as is the term general fund. Now, some of us, myself included, use the term operating expenses, or operating revenue as well. But if you go to the strict accounting terms, the terms they use here are general fund and fund balances, referring to various fund balances. So anyway, if that's worth anything.
That was helpful to me, Len. Again, these terms, I'm a lawyer, not an accountant, and some of these terms, when they switch them, I have no idea what they're talking about for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to me, again, who's done this before, the term fund balance and reserves are synonymous. Okay? The term fund balance and reserves are synonymous. And
okay,
the general fund defined here is the primary operating fund of the village. Now, that presumably excludes items that are restricted, like the sewer and water and library. Well, that's just
right.
So technically the term fund balance used in the language that the village commented on strikes me as appropriate. Now, we could put in that fund balance, or quote, put fund balance and then put in paren reserves if we're more used to that term. That's fine. Or general funds or general fund.
My issue, Len, was just that I didn't understand it. If most people understand it, I now understand it based on our conversation. So whether it's necessary, if there are too many eds out there, but if it's not necessary, it's now clear to me. So that was my whole purpose of asking about it, because I just really wasn't sure whether we talking about the same thing or not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we can use
in the glossary in the budget, which is helpful that general fund is defined. If we're going to use the term general budget as suggested here, I feel like in general accounting nomenclature, you have a capital budget and an operating budget. I haven't really heard the term general budget, which I feel like could start to get complicated with general fund.
Yeah, no, I don't like general budget.
Yeah.
I don't even, and we just all have to be kind of aligned with this, because it can start to become confusing. And for looking at an operating budget with revenue and expenses, that's an operating budget, if you will.
So I think we beat that horse badly. One of my last substantive points or questions is, we have the last section of our document is the capital budget evaluation criteria. Now, when I recall the few Board of Trustees work sessions that I went to where they talked about some capital issues, the staff seemed to me to be referencing valuation criteria from the state comptroller. And I think, well, first of all, does anybody know what that criteria is?
I think there was a disconnect between whether law and safety go first.
Well, that was the discussion we had. I recall the controller not specifying any particular criteria, but indicating, and may have given some examples of criteria, but not saying it must be A, B, C, or D. So my recollection, having the best I can recall on the capital planning document from the controller, state controller, was not that it must be A, B, C, or D, is that you must decide how you evaluate particular projects, and that's as a basis for ranking them. Now, the village did adopt a ranking, if I think in their capital budget document, not this year, I forget which year, the village actually went through in a document that Jerry prepared, did list evaluation criteria, and then ranked projects based on that or using that criteria.
Well, I think my point though is that they specifically reference this, and whether it's based on, their criteria is based on the state control, and that's what they're referring to. I think we should acknowledge that they have some criteria, and we should find out what it is and then comment on whether we think their criteria is equivalent to ours, or if there's a difference that we think is important, we should note those differences. But my understanding of what they've done is they've evaluated capital projects based on some criteria, and we should acknowledge that. As I understand it, is the first time that the staff under Jerry's guidance has done that for the board, and that's a plus. But then we should talk about whether their criteria is different from what we've set forth, or if it's equivalent. We should say that. That's my biggest substantive point.
Ed, if I remember correctly, the state's criteria is very similar to what we have here. The staff then did a ranking based on what they thought was needed, not using any criteria. I shouldn't say not using any, but it wasn't following the states, it wasn't following ours. And I don't remember some of the specifics, but I do remember sitting at that work session meeting when Jerry was explaining some of the reasons why staff thought something was more important than something else. And a lot of what he was saying made sense.
Yes, I was at that meeting too, and I remember that, but I didn't quite understand what they were talking about. But what I remember from that is that the staff was able to elevate something up. It was like there were two different. There was a set of criteria where you got points, but yet if something got 100 points and something else got 50 points, but staff thought that should be elevated to a 1 or a 2. And the staff didn't think that the 100-point one should be elevated to a 1 or a 2. It wasn't elevated. That's like having two separate criteria. And I didn't quite understand how they were making that decision. Well, but anyway, I just think we need to acknowledge that they did something, some kind of an evaluation to choose projects this year, and then to say whether what they did was, could be improved upon or was fine. That's my point. We're making it sound like they didn't do this yet.
Yeah.
And I think we need to acknowledge that they did do it.
Well,
whether it was successful, I have no idea.
If you look at the adopted budget for fiscal year 2022, On page 200, believe it or not, I'm sure you read every word. But on page 259, they have the document we're discussing, they published our document. Following that, page 261, they have a list of the projects and they have 7 evaluation criteria. Consent, order, and need for health and safety. They're both weighted the same, 15 points. 15, that's the weight. They're both weighted the same. External funding is next, 9 points. Vehicle and equipment replacement is next. Operational impact is next. That has the same weight as vehicle replacement. BOT initiative is next. And then maintains and improves the quality of the infrastructure, gets the lowest amount of points at 3, if that means anything to you. So they did apply, they published our document and did apply a set of criteria that's not exactly the same as ours, which is fine. But yes, they also published this other document, which is duplicate of our document. That's our document there. Thank you, Charles. So it's fair to acknowledge at this point that they did that. Well, my own sense in our document is they don't have to publish our document. Our document promoted or advocated certain principles and criteria. They could take and change them in any way they see fit, because we're advisory. The board presumably adopted the budget. I don't know if they adopted a capital budget. I don't believe so. But there's a fairly extensive capital budget section in the adopted budget document. So we have 2 choices. Actually, the way I'm thinking this through now, just talking, sorry, but we either say, okay, we ignore our document now, everything we've worked on here, because essentially we're saying that the village has adopted some form of it as reflected in the adopted budget. And they've applied criteria, not exactly the same as ours, but you know, we could debate about whether that's the appropriate criteria, but they've published something and used it to rank projects. So, and not what we proposed. So it's funny looking at this now, makes me think well, gee, we proposed something, it was changed, which is certainly the village is right. But so.
Well, what's interesting is that this was included in the adopted budget document, and it was only after members of the board pushed back on the document that the staff then gave us feedback. Whereas it seemed that the staff was accepting that prior. But I do think, because I opened my mouth at the work session meeting, asking if they'd like us to rewrite this, you know, taking in their comments, and the answer was yes. We have to submit something.
No, I agree. But yeah, but I think we have to acknowledge that they did do what our document is recommending, and then we should. I think we should either say we think it was a good first effort, and we're here to help, you know, improve it, something like that.
I think you have to examine how it was done. You have budget committee's ranking, which is used. You have the controller's ranking, which had one more criteria than the budget committee did, but basically was similar. And then you have arbitrarily, there was a weighted average added, which then changed the criteria significantly. For instance, those that were required by regulatory or lawsuits or whatever, many of them were no longer on top. So you have to look at the cause and effect of ranking and what you're trying to achieve.
There was one other where Jerry went to the trustees and prioritized what projects the trustees wanted done, like the sidewalk safety, and took that into account when they did the re-rankings. So
I'm not sure what the problem.
The staff rated priority in the far right column, and you've got like a one pickup truck that's presumably incorporating the weight. I don't know what. I don't know how it works.
The staff had its ratings. Jerry then went through and he did his ratings, which was presented to the board. And then the board had some of their own criteria that they wanted to do. So other things were moved around. And then as they went through the projects, what they did was anything that was rated a 1 and a 2, they went through. And then they went through others, and anything that for whatever reason had to be done, whether equipment was broken, it was an emergency repair or something, they also adopted some of those items, and then they haven't gone back to it since.
Yeah, I had tried with some red markups at one point to try to demonstrate that with the rankings and then a allocation across the number of years of a given project, that you would then draw the line up to the point at which your budget will accommodate the project, and everything below the line. If you're adhering to the 1 through 7 or the 1 through 5, that's sort of how it has to work. You can't then, subjectively based on different wish lists, and not have the dollar amount functioning as to where you draw the line. So, this is
something.
If you said to me, which of these are we doing? I had absolutely no way of.
That's right.
And we're just kind of back to square one with this. But what I think would be
right. But Charles, to that point, I think what they're trying to show on the spreadsheet is how each project ranks differently depending upon what the criteria is. But at the end of the day, it's up to the board to pick and approve whatever projects. So this list would never show what's being approved.
Yeah, I mean, it should though. And
correct.
I respect that you want staff department put, but that needs to be done within a framework, and that hasn't been determined how to do that.
Well, I'm not sure I'm in favor of the weighting. To me, it's a 1 because, or a 2 because it's mandated. There's, a regulation, we have fines, whatever. That doesn't need to be weighted. 1 because it's a safety, I think just the straight ranking is sufficient.
Well, I guess I would suggest that the scoring, the weighting is entirely appropriate, because what it does is reflects the order of priorities. And we even agreed to that, because we had a discussion among this committee about, is health and safety more important than a legal requirement or a consent order. Now, both of those are important, and both of those should be given a high weight.
Yep.
Okay. And in fact, the sentence says ranked in order of importance. So we said health and safety was most important, followed by the consent order, and so on down the line. So we rank them in order of importance. Now, in order to evaluate different priorities, it would seem appropriate to give them a score. Now, in that spreadsheet that's at the bottom of the page here, it's presented by department. It would be interesting to see if it was sorted by project score.
Yep.
Because presumably the projects with the highest score would get done first. And at some point you figure out, or you understand what your financing capacity is, and you say any score below X, whatever X is we're not going to be able to do. And because
they actually did have an update when the trustees went over it, which had everything by score, not by department. But the one problem that we have is they have items in there that, quite frankly, should be in the operating budget towards the bottom that had to be adopted, even though it might be item 60. One example, they had actually took it out of the capital and paid for it in the operating was they had Microsoft software licensing 365. And they ended up taking it out of the capital and just paying. But when the fire department, you had certain fire department equipment that should have never been in the capital budget. The mayor said it should have never been in the capital budget, but it was in for this year, and they approved it because it's simply equipment that had to be done, even though it was down on the priority list.
Right, but that's also, Glenn, because we did not tell, we as the global we didn't tell the fire department to include it in their operating budget.
Yeah, you're
they were following
right.
The prior year.
Yeah, that's why the only thing I said before you do the capital budget, you should at least look at the capital budget. If something doesn't belong there and belongs in the operating budget, especially the way we're doing it now, is right at the beginning of the year say, no, this is you gotta put this in the operating budget because it has to be done.
Yep.
If it absolutely has to be done, it's an annual item and it doesn't meet the criteria of 5 years or $50,000. It simply has to be put in the operating budget. You know, they just did that as a vehicle to balance the budget. And Ellen, you were there too. The mayor even acknowledged that
really
you probably should have done it that way.
Can we just back up once and for all with this? Do we know how this chart works? I don't know how it works. I don't even know what we're doing here. There's a project score. I don't even know how these are arrived at. Does anybody?
No.
Okay. So,
Not with
that makes me feel a little better, but at the same time, it doesn't. Because what's happening here? And then if that methodology is clarified to us, which I'm sure it could be, where's the decision with which departmental weight in conjunction with state suggested guidelines function together? That has to be discussed and determined.
Uh-huh.
maybe that's something we can raise.
Yeah, maybe, Charles, I agree. I think what we have here is a framework and a process or a methodology used by the village for the current fiscal year. And are we better off saying, okay, there's such and such in the capital budget for the current year. And here are some thoughts about how to make it more useful or better or easier to understand.
More transparent.
More transparent. Oh, that's the good way. That's more. That's right. But so instead of beating ourselves over the head, quite frankly, and reworking a document that may get little attention, if any.
Agreed. And that will probably, which is probably a good segue into Ellen and Len's effort with the next document as one of the next steps for the committee in an effort to engage kind of dialogue within the process is to have this conversation and understand it collectively and then try to work with it from there. We can go from there. There's been work to incorporate staff comments that we can bring that home, but document is going to work in conjunction with other criteria. We should talk about that because otherwise it's making its way into the budget toward really the top tier. And this 1 through 5 is not necessarily, is very disconnected from what's happening here. And it's something we should probably talk about.
Well, if you scroll up, the criteria, right? Stop, Charles. The criteria is the 1 through 7. That's what they used. Okay, with the assigned. In some
capacity, in conjunction with weights, but
right.
We make no mention of any of how this works and whether if it's being outlined with evaluation criteria as this here, and then you're proceeding to another methodology that
well my own opinion is I don't know why our document is in there.
I agree.
Because starting on page 253 is really a version of our document which Jerry and Dan took and adopted instead or published instead and did the whole budget or did the budget based on that document. Okay. So from 253 to 258 is their equivalent of what we produced. Okay. And they go through and have whole questions for each one of the criterion. They have 6 on page 255. They have 6 criteria. Yep, but thank you, Charles, on the top of the page. But that's what they said. Then they went through, presumably, and scored the many pages of projects. But you got no sense. I after doing all of this, I have no idea of the dollar amounts, the capital budget. except, if you look at the capital improvement plan, I don't know the relationship between, which is on 267. I don't know, there isn't much detail, there isn't much connection between the list of projects and the 5-year plan. The link between those two it's a great leap. And not a transparent, to use Ed's word, not a transparent leap.
I think you may want to give some thought to whether the weighting is meaningful or not, or the criteria that the 7 things on one page and the 8 things on another page, which has been talked about in terms of the budget, is very close to what the budget committee came up to with the 5 things. Okay, the first 3 are basically the same. The others are separated a little bit differently, but generally are following the same form. The weighting throws the entire thing into a different perspective. The weighting is basically a subjective as opposed to an objective approach, which is fine if that's what everybody wants to do. You can take a look at the sheets, and if you understand them, that's great. I found it very difficult to put in perspective. The whole point of the exercise is to put everything in perspective. If you don't do things that are mandated, then you're subject to fines and litigation, which we are now incurring other expenses on. And we're on notice on others that if we don't do stuff, action will be taken. So continue to put them off. Not sure is a prudent approach to life. But if they are there in what I will call the absolute form, not a non-weighted form, okay, just an absolute form in writing, then those things are going to be very clear at the top, and you have to decide whether you're going to do them or not and understand the consequences of doing them or not. Just a suggestion I throw out.
Well, here's the basic decision, I think. I'm just suggesting. Does the committee agree that we'd be better off, rather than spending any more time, quite frankly, on the document we've been discussing, would we be better off working from what is in the adopted budget and making some suggested improvements? Now, we can discuss those perhaps at our next meeting, because we all have to take a more careful look at the document. But the basic decision is, are we better off commenting, seeking to improve something that the village staff has already done, as opposed to trying to take a document that has been, even though it appears in the budget document, that in some way has been taken and modified? And actually, quite frankly, we should feel pretty good about that, to the extent that we teed that up, and we shouldn't expect them to take every word and every methodology that we put on the table. I'm just trying to be constructive and building off something the village folks have already done, that, is, you know, has been used, adopted, and we'd want to make it, as Dan suggests and Ed suggests, more transparent and more useful or readable to the general public and the staff and so on.
And us.
And us.
I would maybe suggest both, because we're so close with having incorporated staff comments, if you will, and you know, Ed had some, you know, additional things that were raised tonight. If track changes and we incorporate that, so that we've taken what was seemingly sensitivity to the document and listened to the suggestions and handed it back to have the board do and the staff do what they will with it, have closure there, but then to Len's point, segue into what appears to still be an incomplete capital budget, more information in front of us to better understand it, and how we get to, again, what I think just needs to be something similar to what's on the screen, with, you know, a budget allocated across the time frame of the project by a criteria set to be determined, with that line drawn, and that ends up being your budget. But that hasn't really been produced. I wouldn't know how to.
Charles, to me, it's almost two different things. We could look at the document that we've been working on and say that maybe, I'm not putting words in anyone's mouth, that is a proposal for a policy for the village to adopt going forward. The flip side of the coin is a recommendation, probably several, that in publishing budget documents, it needs to make sense so we could make heads or tails out of this. And what's presented to the public right now doesn't make sense. To me, those are two very different things.
Absolutely. And I would propose that we consider doing both.
Yep.
And if you can take a shot at just in case that were addressed tonight, so that we maybe have closure, with the caveat that here it is, do what you will with it. Like our work is kind of done with that document, but then we make the transition into what Alan just described, which again, as a resident, or as anyone trying to work through a decision-making process, I don't know how you do that with where we are on the screen. So that seems like a fruitful thing to be engaged with. And we can go from there to talk about how we get there. You know, maybe there is an underlying working framework where those decisions can be made in a structured way, but we don't understand it. And if we don't understand it, a lot of people probably don't understand it, and that's important to clarify what the process is here.
But one of the other things that's key is, and this gets into the document that Len and I were working on, and changing the schedule where we've moved capital planning up to be focused on earlier. So when the budget is adopted, we have somewhat of a clue of what's included in the capital plan. So the documents in the adopted budget booklet, whatever, can include, this was the ranking or the criteria, and this is the 5-year spend or the 1-year spend on those projects. So people can see what we're doing and what it's costing us. But the budget needs to be approved first.
I agree. The idea of moving the capital budget up earlier too was that when the department heads talk about their budget, they can talk about both what their operating is and what their capital needs are, which isn't the way it was done in the past. In the past, all they did was they said, this is our operating budget, and then the capital budget was presented a month later.
Well, I'd like to correct you, Glenn. They focused on expenses, not the revenue of their capital, of their operating budget. It was an expense for you only.
Right.
Just so the minute taker can close this out. We've decided that Ed will do a track changes version with all the changes that we've discussed that Ed brought up. We will incorporate the changes and circulate the document to this committee. And were you suggesting, Charles, over email that we basically finalize the document over email?
If we're capable and allowed to do that, otherwise we can do it at next month's meeting. But
okay.
Ideally, it'd be nice to have that closure and be able to pivot into the document on the screen and sort of the step 2 with our engagement with respect to the capital budget.
Let me ask a quick question. After Ed does his edits, do we want to send it to Jerry and Dan and Augie for review again prior to submitting it to the board?
The board has asked us to do that.
Right. So
we have to do.
Right. So Charles, I think an answer to your question is Ed could send around his proposed changes, and via email, we could say, we're in favor of sending it to Jerry, Dan, and Augie. That's not approving a final document.
Great. That sounds like a great plan. And aligned with what the request is.
Right.
Okay. We'll go from there with that. And anything else on that?
Yes, part 2, Charles, is are we going to, not now, of course, but do we agree at some future meeting, we will review and discuss the methodology or what's in the adopted budget, and with the goal of making improvements that would make what's presented more transparent. Is that
well? Why not we just say, well, with the goal of understanding it better, so we can just understand it better, and then we can decide whether we need to make comments or recommendations to change it or improve it.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't want to make it sound like we've already judged that it needs improvement.
I think we have, but from what I heard from the comments,
how can we say it needs improvement if we don't understand how it works? I mean, I agree that I think it needs improvement to make it understandable.
Okay.
But whether it works in the sense of that it provides for methodology for the board to be able to decide which projects should get funded or not, I mean, that's more policy issue than it is an advisory issue. So I'm just worried about getting into the hot water that we're already judging something we don't understand.
In an effort to keep it sort of non-political, just as a resident, and a resident's right be able to understand a capital budget allocation in a sort of complete, concise format is a reasonable ask. And if none of us understand how the decisions are being made based on what is in the document, that's an important starting point. I mean, if there's a way to make decisions behind the scenes with it, the public should understand it very transparently, and none of us seem to be able to do that with it, which is probably an important starting point.
Yes.
And Dan, it's sounding like that you as a board member haven't been able to use it functionally for decision making, which is 1 out of X where it's not. And if it's working for others, maybe they can explain how. But I feel like that's kind of where we're at.
You might want to also think about focusing on what both you and Len are focused on, is taking the document you've prepared, you know, with Ed's comments, et cetera, and going through what's in the narrative and see if there are better ways of explaining what is in the budget narrative and making suggestions on that to make it more understandable, which is, I think, what you're trying to say. Having two documents is only going to get more and more confusing and more polarized. But that's a suggestion, and I understand it involves more work.
Yeah, I like framing the framework in a way where we put an effort forth to structure something. You know, we incorporated comments. It's back to you guys to work with it however you fit, and incorporate it, don't incorporate it, change it, integrate it with other documents.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like hours at this point.
Okay.
Or I would like it to not be viewed that way. It's out there as a tool and a framework to kind of work with as a group.
Okay.
Or at least we get there in the next, you know, round of handing it back. I've said this before, I want to state it for the record that, you know, the department engagement and what went into this. I mean, when I first met Jerry and he described that, it was really encouraging. And there's a lot of work that went into this methodology. So it's a great concept input from department heads. So it is sophisticated what's going on here with all of this. It's maybe a function of simplifying the presentation and then putting a sort of a simple consolidation as a decision-making tool to finalize the budget. That's kind of where I'm at with it, but I just don't want to dismiss or make it sound like we're dismissing, you know, all of this effort.
I don't think we are, Charles. I think we just need to understand how it was presented. And we need a roadmap.
Not so much how it was presented, how it was done.
Right, we need a roadmap.
We do, and I you know, I felt like, the capital budget wasn't adopted, and it wasn't really discussed that it wasn't adopted. And if it was, I don't know where that happened. So
it has not been adopted.
Okay, and with that, I mean that in itself is an indicator of, you know, maybe this is preventing a budget from being adopted. Maybe, but to be continued. Did we have anything else on this?
I don't think so, Charles. I think that's it.
I think that's over it.
Yes.
How do you guys want to proceed with the other document at this point?
Well, I know Ed's read it. I don't know about Glenn and Bill if they've read it and where they stand. Most of Ed's recommended changes, I'm not trying to belittle them, but it's somewhat wordsmithing and tweaks here and there. I think the big thing we need to discuss is at the end of the document, where we had proposed an expense and revenue snapshot by department where possible. And Ed doesn't necessarily believe that's necessary or serves any purpose.
No, I agreed that we should look at the budget by department, and we should see both the expense and the revenue. What I didn't agree with is the graph which talks about the impact, that the impact of expenses, you know, to the bottom line. I just didn't think that had any relevance to anything.
Well,
a department has a lot of sources of revenue, so it has a way to fund its expenses. Another department doesn't have sources of revenue. I mean, what are we looking at?
I just thought it was another worthwhile or interesting piece of information, but more importantly, when we have someone like Jason Pinto, who during the budget review last spring set out a goal, which was to cover all the expenses for both Parks and Rec with Rec Department revenue, it's a good way to track that. That's his intent.
No, I understand. And for Parks and Rec, that may work, and it may be a good thing. I gave some additional thought about this today, Ellen, and one of the things maybe what I would suggest that maybe gets at the information we want is, instead of calling it net impact, why don't we say the revenue funds X% of the expenses of that department? And then we're not, you know, the impact as to the bottom line, it doesn't seem like we're not worried about departmental bottom line. We just want to get a handle on, you know, how revenue and expenses are, you know, are playing with each other in each department.
Wait, so Charles, can you scroll down a little more?
So if we had a chart that said, you know.
Yep. So what you're saying is, keep the expense, keep the revenue. Instead of net impact, do percent of revenue versus expense.
Yeah, I think that might be a more relevant
That's
issue.
fine. Yep, that's fine. I have no issue with that.
Okay.
What does everybody else think?
That's a good suggestion.
Okay.
I mean,
it took me about 2 weeks to get it, but
that's fine.
I mean, I think, you know, I think what we want to avoid too, perhaps, is the implication that, let's say the police department, I don't know, they issue tickets. No, they don't issue tickets. Whoever issues the traffic tickets, they issue tickets, we get revenue. Now, if the revenue of those tickets is only 5% of the total department costs, does that lead us to say, gee, we should issue more tickets? I mean, we want to be careful about the expectation here. Yep. There's no expectation, I think, that certain departments have to fully cover their expenses or have a higher percentage. There may be opportunities to do that. That's true. But it's just a matter of, to the extent we share this document, maybe the narrative, Ellen, could be maybe take a little more time, a little more space to explain that.
Yep.
Why we're doing, you know.
So what I'll do tomorrow or Friday is accept, if everyone's good with it, all the wording changes Ed suggested, and then I'll rework with track changes on this section and get it out to everybody.
Okay.
Okay, great. This was a lot of work. Thank you for putting all of this together. And you know, this table is just really helpful to sort of set the direction for the upcoming year.
We just did your agendas for you for the next few months.
Yes, you did. Do we have anything else tonight?
I'd like to just ask a question.
I'm sorry, pardon?
I'd like to ask a question, if I may.
Please.
What do we anticipate? Who do we anticipate issuing this memoranda to? Is this something that just goes to the board? Do we expect it to be a public document that's going to be circulated?
So first, we're going to send it to Jerry, Augie, and I guess Dan to get their feedback and incorporate their feedback into the document. And then we want to meet with the board for approval on because we're reversing the timing of events. And we're recommending changing the content of the reviews with the department heads.
Yeah, no, I just wondered whether we intended this to be a public document that we were that was going to be somehow or other communicated to the public, or is it just really in the long run something that we hope that will provide guidance?
The minute it's presented to the board of trustees, it's a public document.
Yeah.
And right now it's a public document. It's posted with our agenda.
Yeah, it's on the website. Yeah. We Bill, I think we only intend this to be as consistent with our function, advisory, and the board can either take our suggestions or not.
Yeah,
the board and the staff.
Yeah, I didn't know whether we wanted this to be publicized in any particular way, or whether it was just meant to be an aid and a guide to the board and to the management. I mean, a lot has gone into this, and it would be nice somehow or other if I don't know if there could be some recognition by those members of the public who are interested or concerned about the budget, which probably doesn't include many people. I know manning the table at the police fair the other day, I had very, very few people stop by to inquire about the function of the budget committee. I don't know how it was with you, Len, after you succeeded me.
Well, put it this way, I guarantee you got more than I did.
Oh.
Because we got nobody.
Mayor Murphy actually came by and he goes, well, to get more people, you should be giving something away. So I looked at him and I go, so the mayor of the village of Meredith is suggesting the budget committee should be giving things away?
I had one visitor who was probably, I guess, an 8th or 9th grader who was interested, and it was kind of cool. So.
That's good.
Yeah. Anything else, or should we make a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
I'll second.
Second. Those in favor?
Aye.
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 Again, thank you all for all your energy and efforts.
Likewise. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Have a good night. Have a good night, everyone.
You too.